If we're talking about animated films of the late 1990s, it's really hard not to focus on the Disney Renaissance. The witty dialogue of Hercules, or the catchy songs of The Little Mermaid, or even the visually epic scenes of The Lion King. But can we please stop to appreciate the thought-provoking, poignant masterpiece that is The Iron Giant? Released mid-1999, this film was up against some really tough competition in the likes of future Disney franchise classics that we've all grown up, and yes, we still love to this day. But amongst these classics, I think it would be a real shame if we overlooked this funny, earnest, and visually stunning alternative. Set in the late 50s during the height of the Cold War, when America and Russia were amidst a time of pretty high tension and deep in the pressures of the space race. The film takes place in the wholesome state of Maine in America and in an unlikely town called Rockwell. And although set in a really common enough town, we follow Hogarth, who probably has the least common name of any animated character that I can even think of. Now, I am not going to give the whole plot away, just in case you haven't seen it. And if you haven't, I would urge you to please go and watch it. It's wonderful. But just to give you an overview, a giant robot from outer space crash lands on the shores of the town. The following night, Hogarth is home alone as his single mother is working late. He's watching a scary movie, and just as it gets to the good part, it loses signal. So he climbs to the roof to fix the antenna, and then he sees that it's missing, and that there's a trail of destruction leading from the house all the way through to the woods. Now, after hearing a local fisherman talk about seeing an alien last night, Hogarth and his childlike imagination can't resist seeing what may lay ahead. So he grabs his BB rifle and leaves the house to investigate. What does he find, I hear you ask? Well, the title would indicate that what he found was indeed the Iron Giant. What ensues from here on is an unlikely but beautiful friendship that I think is arguably one of the sweetest found in any Western animated movie. And what I want to do now is share my thoughts on why I think this film is so good. The film is based on the 1968 novel by Ted Hughes and shares the same name. The book initially came about when Hughes would tell tales to comfort his children after the death of their mother and fellow renowned writer Sylvia Plath. The story has been adapted and altered for screen, but it still never loses its ability to make the spectator feel comfort and find solace through its heartwarming themes. So first, let's look at the characters of the film. Hogarth. Fearless, spunky and determined, Hogarth's the kind of kid that we all felt like we were when we finally tackled the big slide in the playground. He's a bit of an outcast at school and is often left alone due to his mother having to work around the clock because of the absence of a father figure. He's an act first, think later kind of person and often leads with his heart over his head. And this is, of course, what makes him a worthy protagonist. One thing I love about Hogarth is his complete lack of filter. I suppose, like most kids, he just says whatever comes to mind. But he's truthful and earnest and fiercely wants to protect the ones he loves. His tiny stature means the giant towers over him in a kind of David and Goliath image. But his personality makes him seem larger than life. And the way he educates and conducts the giant, even though the giant could easily drop or step on him, just makes their relationship that much more beautiful. What's also great about Hogarth is that he's just like every other 9-year-old his age. He wants to eat junk food and stay up late and just keep random animals as pets. Eli Marenthal voices Hogarth, and he brings a brash tone that complements the character's erratic nature. Marenthal was also about 12 or 13 at the time of recording, which means he emulates that coming-of-age vibe. Hogarth is true to himself and never pretends to be anything else. His dialogue is funny, but also at times really insightful. Overall, Hogarth is a really strong main character that personally I feel acts as a great role model for most of the film's intended audience. I feel like if most of us grew up with something of Hogarth's personality here or there, we'd be doing all right. Now on to Annie Hughes, who is Hogarth's mum. She is voiced by Jennifer Aniston. Yes, that's Rachel from Friends, and she is a hard-working, ordinary, caring and maternal character. She possesses a strong will and is a vital female presence in an otherwise male-dominated movie. Aesthetically, Annie is typical of the 50s era in her style, colouring and clothing. And of course, she wouldn't be complete without her unrealistic waistline. But she isn't sexualised or made to seem ditzy. She's shown as capable and independent. Being that Annie is a woman of the 50s, it's actually really surprising to see how strong-minded she is, and that she's not just shown as fragile or in need of a male saviour. I also really love that Ted Hughes just decided to have a mother figure rather than two parents. Annie's personality also offers a wonderful balance and a calm disposition and a loving nature, which complements Hogarth's eccentric and energetic personality. Aniston manages to bring a natural and loving, but at times nagging, nuance to her voice. Her tone and the inflection on even Hogarth's name just shows that she cares for him even when he seems like the biggest inconvenience in her life. Overall, she's a really effective device because she represents the norm of the story. She's there so that the audience can use her to gauge how normal or eccentric other characters appear to be in comparison. Now we look at Dean, who is voiced by Harry Connick Jr. He is the coolest Art Deco looking guy ever. We all need a friend like Dean. He's accepting, honest and true to himself throughout. Hogarth enlists his help, and to Dean's utter unwillingness, he becomes the Giant's most valuable ally. Dean is characterised as being part of the movement called the Beat Generation. It was popularised in the 50s after the Second World War, and predominantly it's a literary movement that is postmodern, which rejects typical narrative styles and motifs. The Beat Generation mainly comments on American culture and how we should all reject money and materialism as our measurement of success. For these reasons, Dean is seen as, well, I suppose a hippie. He's part of this threatening new liberal generation, which, in a small American town, makes him a total outcast. Connick Jr. brings his classic, nonchalant and almost grumpy tone to Dean and makes him seem standoffish and reserved, but secretly he's a big softie. Dean develops into a strong and heroic father figure for Hogarth, and he becomes a passionately loyal friend to the Giant. Honestly, I don't think the film would be quite the same without Dean. In comparison to Dean and his more relaxed nature, we then have Kent Mansley, who juxtaposes this brilliantly. Highly strung, aggressive, and a total fun sponge, Mansley is our most defined villain in the film. His presence in the story helps to articulate a lot of the major themes, such as the exploration of the unknown, conflict, war, and oppression. His totalitarian agenda echoes the dominant authority of the military during the Cold War era, and his paranoia and hostile behaviour reflects the xenophobia of the American government. Although he seems quite single-minded, he's actually quite sly and tricky. It's also really interesting to see such a patriotic man of the people villainised due to his distrustful and potentially harmful actions against something he just really doesn't understand. The voice actor Christopher McDonald does an extremely impressive job of characterising Mansley and portraying his severe nature. Also, McDonald brings kind of an arrogance to the character that's similar in what he brings to his role as Shooter McGavin in Happy Gilmore. So, the guy's good at playing villains. Mansley dresses in a slick trench coat which demonstrates his serious government agent status, and you feel as if he's been brought up in a military family and expected to follow his father or his grandfather's footsteps to protect and serve America. Overall, Mansley isn't a terrible guy, apart from terrorising a young child and interrogating him, threatening his mother and drugging him. But he's clearly been institutionalised to think a certain way and conditioned to believe anything that he doesn't understand is a threat and needs to be eradicated by dominance and force. So in all, Mansley's a really, really effective device, and he's a character that I think brings a lot to the story. Now, if you were to hear of a plot that said a 50-foot metal alien crash lands on the shores of a small American town without any warning, you would probably think that that would sound like the start of an action-packed thriller, not a child's animated film. And you would think that this giant metal alien was really bad news and definitely not to be messed with. Well, the Iron Giant himself is definitely not to be messed with, but he is far from bad news. He's probably one of the greatest heroes in any animated film I think I've ever seen. The giant has really minimal dialogue, and he's almost infant-like in his innocence, despite his 50-foot stature, of course. And like Hogarth and Dean, he's completely misunderstood. At first glance you can definitely see why, but the giant, he just makes you feel things. Despite the minimal dialogue, the giant shows himself to be kind and honest through his actions. Even the way he learns to pick Hogarth up just shows how gentle his soul is. Vin Diesel lends his voice to the role, and so I kind of think this is the early works of Groot, as seen in Guardians of the Galaxy. It's truly impressive how emotional and empathetic Diesel makes the giant with such monosyllabic lines. The giant shows himself to have more heart than most of the characters in the film, and he does this through his acts of heroism. Now, it's worth noting as well that politically it's quite a statement to show this otherworldly, sentient character to be more capable of protecting American civilians than even their own army. The giant, in all his simplicity, is exceptional. I feel if a character or scene can still move you after having watched it time and time again, you know it's something special. And the scenes with the giant never fail to humour me or make me smile or even make me cry. Now, moving on from the characters, another thing that needs to be spoken about as to why this film is so good is the themes. And these themes are very mature and even political in places, and I really think they transcend
the child genre, and I think that's why this film is so unique and why it appeals to adults and children alike. One major theme is America versus the other. The opening shot of the movie is Sputnik, complete with Soviet Union badge, orbiting the Earth. And this sets up the notion that the film will take place in a time of high tension. And as I've already stated, it's a time where America, and particularly Russia, were not on the best of terms. Another key theme is violence. And like most children's animations, the film isn't stooped in really heavy, visceral violence. However, it does actually make a point of highlighting how we should really eradicate and move away from violence. And now, probably the best theme to be talked about is acceptance. Hogarth, Dean, and the giant are all seen as outcasts at the start of the film. And yet, the narrative expertly explores this theme and the beauty of acceptance through friendships and relationships. And from acceptance comes the theme of love. And boy oh boy, is it refreshing that this film actually focuses on platonic love rather than romantic love. I mean, of course, it wasn't the first to do this, and it definitely wasn't the last, but I think it's definitely one of the ones that explores it in the best context. And this platonic love is probably the most enchanting of all the themes in the film.
Just a last comment on the music. I feel like it's every composer's dream to add to a film in a way that helps tell the story through music. And Michael Kamen brings just that to this film. It heightens and propels a lot of the scenes, whether that be in the drama or the sadness or even the happiness. It's all just up to a new level. And it encourages you to feel more emotion and get even more attached to these characters. Now, in conclusion, Warner Brothers got this one right. The animation of this film is marvellous. The gorgeous marriage of hand-drawn and computer-generated animation makes the aesthetics of this film wonderful, simple, and beautiful. The director, Brad Bird, has made a timeless classic that I think deserves to be in the conversation when talking about the best animated movies of the 90s. And I think a great movie is one that you never get tired of watching, one that you find something new every time you watch, one that is transformative. It makes you think and it makes you change your perspective. The Iron Giant is one of those movies.